Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing wonderfully well today. In this video I continue my monthly series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. And today I wrap up my 2023 with my best of December. And what a year it's been. One for me where the phrase, the days are long and the years are short, was particularly relevant. Film wise, it's been a year where I'm glad that I've managed to get myself to the cinema more than ever before, I think. This last month in particular, I've still been catching up with a lot of viewing after being away in October, so actually I think December has been a month where I've watched the most films all year as it turns out. And so I have a lot of great ones to talk about today. So let's get right into it and talk about the best films I watched in December. First up is Cross of Iron. From 1977 and directed by Sam Peckinpah, it stars James Coburn, Maximilian Schell, James Mason, David Warner, Klaus Loesch, Vadim Glauner and Roger Fritz, among a good few others. I actually have some conflicting thoughts on this one, as there were parts of it that I definitely did not like, such as the editing style, which I really didn't respond to very well. It felt really sloppy rather than just hectic like I think it was intended to be. And quite early on I thought I'm just not going to enjoy this. I also felt that it lacked some cohesion as a whole, and yet if that was done on purpose, which was not so easy to tell, but if it was, then it did serve its intended purpose I think, as I can't imagine war feels very cohesive to those right in the middle of it. Since I read the Eagle Has Landed novel last year, it really got me thinking about the number of German soldiers that weren't true believers. We see so many war films and it's so clear cut, isn't it? There are the good guys and the bad guys, good versus evil, and yet the stark reality I'm sure couldn't be further from the truth. One of the main characters here is a Prussian aristocrat from a military family passing from father to son. There is no belief in Nazism there at all. He was undoubtedly in the military before the war and would plan to be so afterwards. And we have others who actively disdain the party members who join their outfit. And how many others were exactly the same, fighting just for maybe family, country and their survival, thrust into a war they didn't start on the orders of people they don't believe in. My goodness, what a horrible reality that must be. There were some scenes of unbelievable tension where you wait with bated breath to see what will happen. There are scenes of abject madness descending on the men. This was a savage film, savagely cut and shot with lengthy battle scenes that just chop from one explosion to the next, swiftly moving over the dead that lay strewn about as you hear the bullets flying from all around. This film was like the sound of throwing a bag of ball bearings into an empty washing machine. It was loud and brutal, unpleasant and dirty. And yet I think this is one that will stay with me and will be impossible to forget. Next is Run, Lola Run, from 1998 and directed by Tom Tykwer and starring Franka Potente, Moritz Bleibtreu, Gerbert Naup and Nina Petri. This is a film I've been wanting to watch for a long time now, ever since I first saw it on the 1001 movies list. I'm a big fan of the Jason Bourne films with Matt Damon, and I loved Franka Potente in them, and I haven't really ever seen her in anything else, so knowing the reputation of this film and that she was in it definitely made me want to check it out. Going in, I wasn't too sure what to expect here. For some reason the blurb I remembered reading suggested it was something quite different, but I have to say I loved being surprised at what this turned out to be. I won't spoil the story for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but suffice to say, a drug dealing mistake and a deadline lead to just one thing: Run, Lola, Run. If you ever saw Spaced back in the late 90s, early noughties and enjoy Edgar Wright's films, then you'll be familiar with the visual style of this film already, with the fast, intense zooms, the super quick cuts paired with the intense techno soundtrack. It is so unbelievably 90s and I loved every second of it. Potente herself is great in it, imbibing every scene with this visceral energy, urgency and adrenaline. And despite its short length at just over 80 minutes, this one was really fantastic and I was delighted to pick up this Umbrella edition. Next we have one that I was not expecting to like so much, as it immediately propelled itself into my top 5 first time watches of the whole year. It's Never Look Away, a film from 2018 directed by Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck, which is such a badass name, who also made the more famous and Oscar-winning The Lives of Others in 2006. Never Look Away stars Tom Schilling, Sebastian Koch, Paula Beer, Ina Weisse and Saskia Rosendahl. Right off the bat, I'll just say that it's usually a good sign when you get to the end of a 3-hour film and you wish it was longer. This was magnificent, operatic and a triumph. It's like a tidal wave that begins its slow build with a small gust of wind and over the course of 3 hours turns into something enormous. It follows the life of an artist from when he's a boy in Dresden in the late 1930s, surrounded by the turmoil happening in Germany, and indelible experiences that he had at that age, and then moving to his later life in the post-war period, into his 20s and into his 30s. Working to hone his craft and to become the best artist he can be, while dealing with the fascist oppression, at first with Nazism in control, and then communism in control afterwards. Navigating his life, family and relationships. There's such a depth to this film that connects right to your heart, and I found it so deeply moving. There's a persistent darkness that hangs like a foreboding and also quite literal presence throughout this film, and constantly reminds you of the lack of freedom in expression, which of course is surely juxtaposed to the point of art, which is supposed to be a free expression. There's a great scene right at the beginning of the film where this is discussed on a museum tour, very much from a closed-minded perspective, but it sets things up perfectly for what's to come. Having recently just travelled in Berlin myself for a short while and actually seeing with my own eyes things like the memorial to the books burned in the first book burning that took place in the 1930s as we stood on that very spot, and then putting my hand on the Berlin Wall, it just brought home a tiny shred of reality. These things are so indentured in our zeitgeist as we've seen countless World War II films and Cold War films for decades that makes these events seem like fiction to someone like me who didn't grow up during them. But the reality that normal German people had to live under for about 60 years of the 20th century is crazy to think about. Consecutive oppressive regimes if you lived in the East. And this film really does an astonishing job of showing us something of that sort of life. Absolutely incredible. Up next is one that I was lucky enough to catch at the cinema, and definitely I think one of the best films of 2023. It's Fallen Leaves, directed by Aki Kaurismäki and starring Alma Poisti and Jussi Vatanen, Jana Hitanian and Nupu Koivu, which I already apologise for no doubt butchering. To my shame, this is actually the first Kaurismäki film I've ever seen, but I can safely say that it will propel me into more from his filmography because it was absolutely superb. You know when you give someone the side eye after you've said like a cheeky joke or a pun and just quickly catch the eye of your friend smirking? Well, I would say that that's what this film was like, and that's how it made me feel. This is a quirky and funny romance, almost like a tragicomedy, but I feel like that may oversell the tragedy aspect here, though there are plenty of tough moments in this film. It's like a romance of magnets, where you spin them around each other and through unseen force they are slowly pulled together, as that's exactly what happens to our two main characters here. There is this sense of subdued joy and hope here in the midst of hearing nothing but bad news and personal struggles. There seems to be one obstacle after another that happens, but it's all taken in stride and without complaint. No one here wallows, but instead keeps calm and carries on. This is almost the most British, non-British film I've ever seen. I feel like we must undoubtedly share some similar national idiosyncrasies with Finland. Yes, there are disappointments and no doubt frustrations and anger, but it's all more or less taken as is and taken in stride. Overall, it's absolutely brilliant, comical and sweet, with some great characters and great performances from Poisti and Vatanen, who had some excellent chemistry, and definitely one I'll be picking up as soon as Mubi put out a Blu-ray release. And lastly, we have A Swedish Love Story. I came across this one after hearing Ruben Östlund mention it in his top 4 favourites, which Letterboxd often get people to share when they interview them, and I love to watch because not only do most people panic when they get asked that, but it's usually off the top of their head and so quite interesting to hear their choices. But this one sounded really interesting to me and I found it on Curzon Home Cinema, which I've been availing myself of quite a lot recently. It's from 1970 and directed by Roy Andersson, and this is the first film of his that I've seen, though I have been curious about a box set of his films that I know Cares on previously released, though I'm not too sure if it's still available. The film stars the young Anne-Sophie Keelan and Rolf Solman as our main protagonists. This was such a tender and sweet film in many ways, reminiscent in the way that it made me feel to some extent of something like American Graffiti or Dazed and Confused, where you can almost feel the warm mornings and cool evenings and the freedom of not being in school and finding summer love. But the kids here are younger, and they are all really kids at about 15 and 16, so you won't see any 25-year-olds pretending to be teenagers here, which was good to see. And Andersson does an amazing job to get such good performances out of these teenagers that are so young. You are completely swept away in their story from their first sighting and onwards. I think it's in the stolen glances and the unspoken that this film does its most powerful work. There's not a huge amount of dialogue, but you sense their connection as they meet and laugh and spend time together, and that's what really keeps you hooked. There's one scene in particular which I thought summed up adolescence better than I think any film I've ever seen before has, where the young girl talks about how she wanted to talk to a boy, waited somewhere for him, and then when he got there didn't talk to him, and in fact turned away, and then he left, and she didn't know why she had done that. And if adolescence could be summed up in one sentence, I think that would be it, absolutely perfectly captured. There's also a pretty interesting and darker parallel with the adults, who almost bookend this story to some extent. The kids see these adult relationships with their difficulties, petty bickering, personal struggles, loneliness, and so on, and it sort of hangs over the summer like a spectre awaiting them in the future that they can't really comprehend. But for me, that just elevates and enhances how special and precious these times are when we're young and carefree for the most part. And then lastly, onto quite a few honourable mentions. The first up is Sahara, starring Humphrey Bogart, which seemed at first a fairly standard war movie, but turned out to be far more compelling than I expected and was pretty great. Next is Fremont, or Fremont, I'm not sure which was also fantastic, about an Afghan translator who had to flee to the US, with a great debut performance from Anaita Wali-Zada. And then The Lives of Others, an Oscar winner from 2006, directed by the same chap who directed Never Look Away. And then Red River, which was a fantastic western. And lastly, Godland, which was simply stunning and sombre in equal measure. And well, that brings us to the end of the video, and the end of my December and my 2023 in film. December for me was a bit of a bumper month for films this year, which has been wonderful, and I've had the opportunity to watch a lot of amazing stuff. I hope your December has also been lovely, and that you've had a great Christmas and New Year. And so, here's wishing you the very best for this upcoming year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.